All right, reminder to sign in if you haven't already. Do we know if we're waiting for Ben or Terrence this time?
Terrence is on PTO, so no.
Emily, you know if you have Ben?
I thought he was coming, but
Cool.
I'm sure he won't mind if we get started.
Give him 1 minute, 3:05. Get started. Trying to figure out how to remove links in the doc. Your formatting doesn't work. All right, should we get started? First thing on the list is, I already mentioned sign into the doc if you haven't already. Next thing is introductions and new faces. Do we have anybody here who hasn't been on the call before? I think I recognize most people. Josh, I don't know, have you joined us before?
Yeah, I've been here. I was here roughly 2 weeks ago, in and out. I'm on the same team as most of the Salesforce folks here. Principal engineer working on builds. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Great to meet you. All right, next thing on the list is release planning and updates. Javier/Emily, I'm guessing.
We're very close to being ready to cut 2 new releases of the spec, Platform API 04 and Buildpack API 04. Lifecycle release is planned for the end of next week.
No updates on the platform side of things. The only minor thing is we do now have Pack being distributed to the Chocolatey package manager for Windows. So that just happened earlier today.
Awesome. Unless there's anything else on release planning, we'll do our 10-minute review of outstanding RFCs. 1 second to share. Lots of new stuff this week. All right, everybody see that? Cool. So first thing, shell-free profile D. This is one I just opened right at the start of the meeting that I want to talk about today that's on the agenda. Project descriptor schema is next. Any updates there?
Yeah, I opened this. We're working on something on the Salesforce side where we're kind of expanding on Project Toml. And one thing we wanted to do is validate people were using the modified, like basically adding metadata to the metadata section. But one thing we did was actually add a schema. And I think that turned out to be pretty useful because we would find validation errors that even the pack was not finding. So this is just like I don't know, should I go through the whole thing here? We only have 10 minutes.
I was going to ask if you want to put it on the agenda for today or if...
Yes, yeah, okay, on the agenda for today. Yes, sounds great.
Awesome. Next one on the list is decouple build pack plan and build materials. The next 4 after that actually, opt-in layer caching, override envars by default, and any stack build packs I all put on the agenda today also with the top one. They're all kind of small changes going up to 1.0. After that, RFC for project descriptor flexibility. That was Terrence. Joe, do you know if any updates on this? Anything we need to do?
No, I don't think so. We talked about it briefly maybe last week, and I don't think anything has changed. Although I haven't looked at it, so it's possible something has.
Sounds good. Do we need to do anything to it, or?
Can you check the votes on there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's still progressing along, just waiting for responses back, but
Okay,
it's not
cool.
stalled.
Layer origin metadata is a draft. Were we going to close this, or is this was this replacing a previous one, or was this replaced by a previous one? I forget.
This is the one replacing.
Got it. Cool. We
think.
already.
Yeah, Paul's on the call, it looks like.
Awesome. Did you put that on the agenda for today, or do you want to chat about it?
Yeah, we can add it to the agenda. I did want to chat a little about it.
Cool. Feel free to put anything before my 5 on there. I don't expect we'll get to all of that. Also, same thing for Josh. Next thing is pack subcommands. Javier.
Cool. I made a few updates to it, I believe, yesterday. I think it's just a lot of minor details that I added to the RFC, but I don't think I've gotten any feedback that prevents this from going in. So just want to see if I could get some re-reviews on it.
Awesome. Nothing needs to be changed. All good.
Correct.
Cool. Multi-API lifecycle descriptor, Emily. This is an FCP.
It's an FCP. There were still some open questions after we moved it into FCP from Terrence about the experimental APIs. So I just took all the controversial parts out. And I think Terrence is going to open experimental APIs RFC in the future.
Do we need to take the FCP tag off, or is it still an FCP? Are we
It's still an
maintaining it
FCP.
afterwards?
We made a change afterwards, but it's still an FCP. We removed everything that was controversial, so I think it can merge on that date that's written there.
All right, we'll go with it. Experimental features. Joe?
Yeah, just take a look when you have a chance.
Cool. Application mixins on the agenda for today. Inline build packs is not on the agenda for today. Any updates there?
I think this finalizes today.
I would guess that's true. I'm getting ready to do it right now.
Awesome. Ben, you got that? Can move on?
Yep.
Cool. A lot of RFCs. Read write platform volume out. Any updates here? FCP.
I believe for today, right?
Awesome. Offline build packages. Do we have Dan on the call?
Yeah, I'm here. I still have some changes to make to this from last time.
Cool. I think we're talking. I was talking to Emily and Ben a little bit. Let's all do like a SIG meeting on offline, kind of the offline build package interface. They had some good feedback too. It'd be great to kind of work together on that.
Perfect.
RFC for stack metadata.
There's some DCO issues. This is ready to merge once we get the DCO issues sorted, so we can skip it.
Got it. Do I need to bug somebody about the DCO?
No, I got it.
Cool. Thank you. Add root build pack interface. That's a draft. RFC for custom CA certs, draft. Image exposes metadata for all layers. This is also a draft. Is this?
Yeah, that's the one I moved that to draft by accident. Sorry about that, Paul. But if we need to open it, we can.
This is the one that's replaced by the other one. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul, are you okay with this sticking as a draft? Or do you want me to close it, or any way I can help with this?
I think it can be closed. I wasn't sure if I should do that myself or not.
Either way, I'm happy to click the button now if it's convenient for you.
Do it.
All right. All right. All the way through. Next thing on the agenda is application mixins. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yep. So I made a couple updates based on our discussion last time. I just wanted to share those. I think the non-controversial one is that the stack packs will be expected to be in the image prior to creation of the builder. And by default, all of the stack packs, there'll be an implicit order where all of the stack packs provided will have their detect run. And you can override that in Builder TOML. Because of that, I've made a change to the mixin contract where it is, we talked about, should it be a pattern? Well, if it's a pattern, how do you tell if it's a pattern versus an explicit string to match one mixin? So I've changed this to a Boolean. It either provides mixins or it does not. And we'll talk more about that in a second, but that changes how the CA certificate example, and again, reminder, this is just an example. We could implement CA certificate build pack many different ways. But this no longer works through the mixin contract. It'll have its bin detect run by virtue of it being in the CMB stack packs, the provided stack packs with the image, but otherwise works the same and uses the bin detect to provide, CA cert that might be required by user space build pack. The mixin build pack, one that provides mixins, would refine the mixins that it provides in some way in bin detect, and this is still a work in progress. I don't think that should be done based on application source. I think it should be some input, like a mixins TOML that's available in the CMB dir or something like that.
Sorry, do you mind if I ask a question about that?
Yep, I'm done.
So mixins TOML, I'm assuming, comes from other build packs. Is that right? So another build pack could request mixins
it comes
for
from
the app build pack to install?
It could. It comes from the platform, which will combine, whatever mixins are needed. I was thinking that mixins TOML might have the exact same schema as build plan or something like that. And you'd have, ones that are required but not provided, and the build pack would sort that out.
So to me, this is a big change in the architecture of how build pack detection works, because currently detection can runs in parallel and is declarative, and they don't depend on each other, right? We went back. First, we had this pipe of things, and we're all interdependent, and we changed to detection is completely declarative. Everything says this is what I require to provide, and then there's a thing. That's what I really liked about the matching thing, was it was a declarative way to say this is what I can provide, and then it would get matched up during detection. At the point where you're parsing a list, the post detection list of mixins, we might as well not have a detect phase. That's kind of my thinking.
Yeah, no, I get for the build packs that would dynamically provide them in bin detect, I get that.
I feel like what we could do is, instead of even having a mixins bool in the build pack could just provide mixins, and then something else can require mixins, and then the metadata put the names of the mixins, and then they match and it can run.
But how do you say I provide 100,000 potential mixins in the case of the app build pack, right?
This is sort of getting at one of the things I was lobbying for last week, which is because mixins are defined by the stack author, and we're seeing these stack packs ship on the stack image. I feel like we can just have one build pack that knows how to install all of the mixins that are defined on the stack, because there's no valid extension point for someone to make up new mixins later based on what we've said a mixin is.
I think I disagree with the framing. It's like the stack pack may be distributed by the person who creates the stack images, but the person who creates the stack images isn't the same as the person who defines the stack ID, right? We have one IO build pack stacks Bionic and many distributors of stacks with different sets of packages. So we could have many different types of stack pack and keep that functionality modularized. I don't think I agree that there should only be one stack pack per stack ID. That's the formal one that you have to use, that's just for providing OS packages. That seems very limiting.
I don't think we're saying that there's only, you could create your own stack with that stack ID with your own mixins build pack or app build pack, right? But it's really about that contract. What does mixins mean on this stack? And that, I feel like that really is defined by the group or people or whoever who make that stack. And so I worry, like when we're talking about patterns and stuff like that, about some real oddballs, matching things you didn't expect to because there was some, weird thing about how we define mix-ins on that stack.
I mean, even a special value of any, it's just not we don't do pattern matching, and we have a value that's like, I can provide all types of mix-ins. There's no validation, right? That I think the root of the problem for me is I don't see mix-ins as operating system packages necessarily. I see them as like things that follow that ABI contract, right? That are rebasable at runtime, and
Yeah.
CA certs are like that, right? And so in a sense, it's good if they go through that mix-in interface because they follow that contract, even if they're not operating system packages. Like the whole idea of stack packs is we want something that operates at this level of rebasability in the end, and mix-ins are the unit of modular rebasability that you can use to like achieve that goal.
I
Well,
disagree about the CA cert example because
right, yeah, like how does that work on Bionic, right? Like how would you define CA certs as a mix-in on Bionic?
We can add additional prefixes, right? We already have sets as an example, and sets can encompass things that aren't OS packages. We have examples of that, right?
Right. So then so now we're back to like what goes in this Buildpack TOML that tells it that it provides CA certs.
As in, like, if you can only do an any or an exact mix-in name, how do you define I mean, I think their solution.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think there's a question about CA certs as mix-ins so every other mix-in, like the name of the mix-in describes a like known set of changes. So if that mix-in is there, then that exact set of changes should be there, right? But CA certs are different because you can't, unless you actually put the cert itself in the mix-in name, there's no way for the name of the mix-in to describe the exact change you want. And therefore I feel like trying to fit it into that interface is awkward.
Yeah, with set equals CA certs, where does the cert come from? Like where we do the build plan thing here?
I think my point isn't that I have a better solution for the UX. It's that I like the idea of, from where we were before, figuring out a UX for being able to specify those things that, that keeps the architecture of how detection works and things like that, the same. Like this would be it's like, I feel like we're pretty close to something agreeable that, didn't kind of drastically change how, Buildpacks interact.
There's nothing about this CA certs example where it provides a CA cert that can be run in parallel with everything. And then down here, it requires one. There's nothing about that breaks any part of the detect architecture today.
But the what's proposed above for how detection would
Yes.
work, the ability to read mix-ins, the other build packs output, that's a very big change. So like
we also don't have to do that, right? Like if like specifying any or true, we may not do the refining thing, and it's just like whatever build packs or whatever mix-ins are missing, the platform assumes will be provided by any or true.
I think if we do that, then I'm much more okay with saying that there's this idea of ABI compatible changes that aren't mix-ins. I worry a little bit about not capturing that in metadata, but that could be solved in a different way. I'm hesitant. I'm much less strongly opinionated about this, but I'm hesitant to say that we shouldn't describe all the stack pack changes as mix-ins, because it feels like mix-ins were the unit of ABI compatible change that we wanted to use in the past. And so like, is there a need to create some other thing here? Because you could have really customized ones, or like, like when you install a Ubuntu package, you're not guaranteed to get the same result each time. It runs arbitrary code, right? So like, is it really that different installing arbitrary CA certs versus, I lean towards calling those things mix-ins, but I'm not strongly opinionated about it as long as we kind of don't change the detection interface and keep it declarative. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think mixins are ABI compatible, and stack packs can only make changes that are ABI compatible. But I don't think every ABI compatible change has to be a mixin, because I don't think it fits well in the CA cert example. Like imagine a build image that someone had installed certs on, so then it said it already had the CA certs mixin. Because that mixin name doesn't describe the requirements, it just described that a thing happened at some point. I feel like it breaks down, whereas all the other mixins describe a declarative end state, not a thing to do.
It makes me nervous, but I wouldn't block moving forward on that. Or like if there's consensus that we should just have a yes, you can be all mixins, or specify exact mixins, or not use the mixin interface and make other ABI compatible changes, I'd still be willing to approve.
Can you say it again?
If we made the change during detection so that it was declarative, you could just say all mixins or explicit mixins, or not going to use the mixin interface but going to make ABI compatible changes anyways, I'd be willing to approve that. I still have reservations about not using the mixin interface in some cases, but not strong enough that I would block moving forward on them.
Yeah, that's good. That's something to go on. I think that the pattern matching was what I was really stuck on from being able to find something that actually worked. So I don't know. I'm not sure how you feel about that, Emily, but I think that gives me something that I can try and work with to get something we're all happy with.
I'm not attached to the pattern matching necessarily, as long as there's, you could even look at it like defining the mixins ahead of time in Buildpack TOML or whatever is a way to do pre-validation, and then you can turn that validation off, and so any mixins end up getting filtered through the list of mixins and sent to it, right? That might be nicer interface than the pattern matching.
Okay. Yeah, I think the CA certs example is kind of problematic because, like, even if this were possible, there are other ways you could still do it with mixins, right? Like this example doesn't mean you can't do it as a mixin. And I'm trying not to take a stand on like what are mixins, I really want something that can leverage mixins as part of the stack pack mechanism, but yeah. All right.
Somewhat related, sorry, on the mixin stuff. So at some point, like the stack packs, so it's two things. One of them is pedantic, most likely, and the other one is maybe more in line with our conversation. But the stack packs, at some point, we kind of viewed them more to be just like build packs, right? And not so much as, or just a different type of build pack. But now it seems like they're a very specific type of thing that operates very similarly to a build pack. So the naming seems to be a little bit weird, right? This is the pedantic part where it's stored in this CNB stack packs, but then we use build pack, like in the TOML itself and within the TOML schema itself. So I'm wondering if we could basically align those two, right?
Yeah,
either we're going to full build pack or we're going stack pack as it's
I think that makes sense. Like we could do CNB stack build pack, right? I was kind of thinking about not using stack pack as an official like spec term. So yeah, I'd be happy to update it so that it's just build packs.
Cool. And then the other thing kind of in line with that is that at some point stack packs could have been provided by, let's say, in pack as specifying, as part of -- build pack, you could specify a stack pack and we would have run that operation first. And it seems like at some point it changed into being something that's embedded into the stack.
Yeah,
so
that's
no longer applicable, right?
It's out of scope. I think in the future, if we get enough end user demand for something like that, we can explore the generic root build pack concept and all the, like I feel like there's no way to get that without giving up something else. And if enough people want it or need it, I think we should explore it. And this doesn't rule that out. It's just out of scope.
So then I'm curious where the stacks array comes into play. If it's something that you're embedding into your stack image, why define or have the capability of defining multiple stacks IDs that it's compatible with? Like, I feel like we're losing that compatibility if it's not something that you could then plug into multiple stacks.
I think you could distribute a stack pack, right, that works on Bionic and Xenial because they both use apt, right? And then people could pull that into their stack image, for Bionic or for Xenial. And it's just a validation that it's right.
So who's doing that validation, I guess I'm trying to figure out who's going to do that validation and where.
I think this is a key thing that keeps coming back is like the person who defines the stack ID is that's in many cases that's like the CNB project, and the person who creates a stack image is like, Pacato team, in the CFF or Heroku folks, or like those are different people, and so you can have a stack pack that's distributed independently that's compatible with a number of different stack IDs that is reusable in those different contexts. And the validation would be when you're creating a stack image or when you do a build, you can confirm that the stack pack matches the ID, and it's a violation if it is an incompatible combination. We don't have much tooling to create stack-based images, so it's like there's not a place we would validate when we create it. Maybe it'd be a build time validation instead.
It's out of Pack's hands because Pack doesn't create stack images now, but it doesn't mean that's not useful information for somebody who's creating stack images.
Yeah, I'm thinking even if Pack was creating the stack, right? Like we could have it. I think right now we suggest stacks, so it's not out of the realm of something that we could do, where we could create stacks based on other things. Yeah. I guess in that scenario, that's when validation would happen.
Yeah, I feel like the CA certs and mix-ins build packs could easily be something that the CNB project provides for Bionic now, because we've defined what it means to be a Bionic stack. And then stack image creators would still need to go and package those on whatever image they're building. But I feel like that could be nice. You can have build packs in the project for the first time.
I have one last question, Joe, about the bin detect outputting provides name equals CA cert. So that's like it's providing a regular build plan entry dynamically. Would the idea be in this model where we're still doing the build plan declaratively, you can't define mix-ins there. You can only define regular build plan entries there, and then mix-ins have to be defined statically in the build pack toml-like thing.
In this example, yes.
Awesome. Okay, that sounds really good to me. Or like my vision of this is of how you're proposing this between the two previous options. Sounds good.
Okay, I think we're almost there. Just FYI, I've started working on implementation for this. I feel like this surface like the surface part of it that we're talking about is not the hard part to implement, and it's going really well. Like using Canico to snapshot the changes, it's pretty sweet. So
using Canico as a library, or
yeah, and I even got some changes into Canico to make it a little bit easier to use as a library.
So excited.
Looking good.
Can you update all their module dependencies while you're in there?
I don't even want to get started on their dependencies.
Joe, I was going to ask, since you brought up Canico, do we feel like that could be just in the Windows sense, Canico is not Windows compatible? Do we feel like that could be swappable?
I saw that comment. I think so. I have no clue. I mean, could it be swappable within lifecycle? Yeah, absolutely. What it would take to actually implement that, I have no clue.
Yeah, and that I would be definitely interested in doing the implementation, or we could find folks who'd be willing to do that. I was just thinking like from a spec perspective of keeping that either undefined or an interface that we could build to.
Yeah, absolutely. Canico is an implementation detail. I'll send you the code that I'm working on, and I can point you exactly to where. Like I have a Canico snapshotter that you have an instance of, or whatever the hell you call it in Go, and you can see how you could just plug in a Windows snapshotter or something. So
Cool.
I'll tag up with you.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. Thank you.
Do mixins make sense in Windows, or like do people often make changes to Windows-based images? I'd like to understand. Maybe we don't have to have the conversation now, but I'd like to understand more about what Windows needs are for base image modifications, because I haven't seen that done very much before.
Yeah. So for instance, I'll give you the short version. So there is this sort of a package equivalent for Windows. There's Windows features. The catch is there's like 4 different kinds of Windows features. There's Windows packages and Windows optional features and Windows features. Anyways, it's not like a perfect exact. There's not like a singleton concept of that, say, Bionic would have for a single package, but yeah, those would be the way that I say I'm building on top of a Microsoft image. I want to throw in a whole bunch more software like media codecs or some dependency for this particular kind of app. And along that sense, like the stack packs would be a great fit potentially for putting that one set of packages on top of your stack image.
Mixins sound great there too, with different prefixes, like we're doing for the different types. It's a good fit.
Yeah. Even like it had. Well, I'll spare you the details, but it helps out with some of the OS kernel coupling and some other things too. The mixin concept is a great fit.
Awesome. I'm going to move us along actually, because we're a little over halfway through, and we just got through the first RFC of 8 or something. So the next thing on the list is bill of materials updates. This is Ben.
Yeah, you mind? I'll give this a quick share. This comes from me. Find the right document here. Internally at VMware, we have a team that is experts in what it means to have bills of materials across different deployment strategies, things like images, for example. They've done lots of work with, for example, government agencies and are really tuned into like the IETF and ISO specs around this kind of thing. So they've asked for changes to the Cloud Native Buildpack specification to make it sort of compliant with what the rest of the world expects here. I have no idea what this is going to come out looking like at the end, but we are working on it now. This is an open document for anybody who wants to participate in that discussion. So if you are from another company who is implementing Cloud Native Buildpacks and wants that kind of secure software pipeline, bill of materials kind of information, and you have some opinions about it, please join in.
Have you thought about compatibility with GraphAOS and kind of other?
I mean, you can talk to Nisha as well as I can to push back and tell her what we think we also need. I know nothing about this space at all. So other than providing the context of how we build dependencies and include them in Cloud Native Buildpacks, I don't even know what we want.
Makes sense. That was a thing that came up this week that I was thinking about based on the previous conversation.
Yeah. Yep. The next thing on the list, I'll move us along, is service binding specification updates. So the Cloud Native Buildpacks project put together a strawman Cloud Native Buildpacks binding specification probably almost a year ago now. We've had great success with it. The Kubernetes community noticed it, and as they've started working on a service binding specification, they have adopted the important bits of it, especially when it comes from application projection, but it is not fully compatible. I don't think we ever expected it to be. So there will be an RFC forthcoming that basically changes our binding specification, which was always an extension in the first place, to match up with what the Kubernetes binding specification looks like, both in the structure of the directories and names of environment variables. This will effectively supersede what we do, with the one exception that we're going to define it a little bit more tightly during the build phase. Please don't be surprised by this. If you are a platform that is thinking about service bindings, know that this change is coming to you. I've already done the changes in the library, so we will, for the foreseeable future, support both our extension specification and the new Kate's specification. And then at some point when our stuff sort of ages out a year from now, we'll probably remove that support from the libraries.
It's amazing to see something we started in a project expand out into its own separate initiative with multiple different companies working on it. Right? That's really
Wish
great.
me luck at the app sig next week.
Yeah. Is it getting proposed to CNCF?
It won't, no, not to the CNCF, but it will be to Kubernetes steering.
Oh, I see. Wow, that's great.
Yeah. Yep. Ideally, the end result of this is it is adopted as an official specification inside of the Kubernetes ecosystem, provided they don't hate me.
And then we yank the CNB bindings back out of CNB and just put a line in somewhere that says, and to do service bindings, you should use this.
Use K8s, and at build time, you can expect it to be a /platform/bindings. Yep, that's what the end result looks like if all things go well.
Love it.
Okay. That's it for me.
All right, next thing on the list is layer origin metadata. I think this is Paul.
Hi.
Want to share?
Yeah. Okay, so my main, I haven't touched this RFC in about a week in any like meaningful way. Well, I tried yesterday morning, but anyway, the kind of how I'm feeling is that I'm not. I think the work that remains to be done on it is like pretty like outside of my like knowledge when it comes to Buildpacks. So it's like not clear to me what more I can do. So I was mainly asking. I mainly wanted to come in and ask if there was a suggestion to that end, or if someone maybe want to work with me on that, on at least getting this thing out of like draft form and answering some questions before it gets to the point where we say it's anybody who wants to can look at it.
Could you summarize what the RFC is? Just, you don't have to go into a lot of detail if you don't want to, but just at a high level, like
yes,
what you're proposing for folks, and so interested people can opt in.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so layer origin metadata is about being able to like identify all of the inputs that go into a layer, and there are some kind of obvious inputs that we know about, like the the version of the application that's going in, but other things that are inputs are like the state of other layers that the build pack executables are going to see, and because those things matter and can affect the outcome of the build, we should be able to know. We should be able to identify those things. So this is about being able to identify like where like cache layers came from, and saying that this build pack was generated and it saw this this cache layer at that time, things like that. So it's like we're tentatively calling this something like traceability, of layers, like how they originate.
And a big thing in this is it covers build time layers too, right?
Yeah.
Not just layers that make it into the image.
Yeah, because all of those are important. Yeah.
Be a good place for your build time bomb to end up, Stephen, from your new RFC.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that too. I just proposed an RFC over the weekend that creates a separate bill of materials for the essentially for build time dependencies. It doesn't end up in the kind of layer label metadata, so it doesn't affect the reproducibility of the image. It's not label specific. It's just general bill of materials. You can put whatever you want in it, right? And so I don't know if it solves exactly your problem, but what you're proposing could either go on top of that or it could follow a similar pattern. I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that.
Everything can end up in report TOML, the build bomb and the layer origin metadata. So like build time layer metadata specifically, which would be interesting. I'm like interested in this proposal, and I know I've threatened to help more in the past. I've been very busy lately though, so I was wondering if someone else would like to step in and help trying to get this out of draft. Maybe someone wants to get more involved in the lifecycle. Because I definitely can help on this, but I'm not sure if I have enough time to provide the amount of help that would be useful to Paul.
Have you brought it up to the maintainers in training?
I haven't, because they're both out doing
this week. Yeah.
This week. I was thinking that might be a good opportunity to like get more people involved in the RFC process. But just wanted to throw it out here too, in case anyone who's in this call was interested.
Let's definitely talk to Natalie and Yael and see if they're interested too.
We'll find you someone, Paul. It's a good idea. We should get it. We should get merch.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't want to like put like all the pressure on you, Emily. So that's why I figured I'd bring it up in the working groups meeting. But yeah, there's no rush, so we can totally wait till Natalie and Yael, I guess you said, are back. Sounds good to me.
I'm also willing to help figure out how this kind of leads into report TOML, because I'm really interested in that sort of build time metadata more generically. So like happy to provide feedback. If you wanted to schedule something, I'd definitely chat about it.
Okay. Thanks.
Cool. Anything else on layer origin metadata?
I don't have anything else. No.
All right. In that case, I'm going to try to go through 5 RFCs that I opened really quickly. They're relatively small, so I'll go quickly and just stop me if you have questions. Give me 1 second to share. I think there's something in this for everybody. It's mostly stuff that I collected from different requests people had for things they thought were broken before 1.0. Some of it's stuff I care deeply about. Some of it's stuff that I just thought, well, if we don't do this soon, it's probably not going to happen. So starting at the bottom here, any stack build packs. So this just makes it so that if you don't specify stacks in a build pack, that you can use it on any stack, which is kind of dangerous because it means that you could end up with an ecosystem of build packs that just never specify stacks and no validation. But seemed for things like inline build packs, which are essentially already stackless build packs, and the ability to just write a quick script that runs in any Linux distro or just contains a Go binary. It seemed like it was probably a good idea. Like this may be a question of, should we have like an operating system flag? Like, could you accidentally, run a Windows one on a Linux one? But
That's
you
what
can't
I was
make it.
Thinking. But I think I left a comment about that. I don't know what happened to it, but I was thinking that if the canonical distribution of Buildpacks is an image, the image has a platform in it, so that might be able to get away with it.
Right. I was going to say you can't make a build package that works on both, anyways, and so I don't think it's a problem. That's why I did not call that out in there. All right. Yeah. Any questions about this? Anybody think it's a terrible idea, just so I can get a sense? Going once, going twice. And moving on to the next thing. Override envars by default. This is a relatively small change to how environment variables are ordered as they're added into the environment using environment variable directories and layers. So the idea is that currently, if you don't specify a prefix, it means append. You should append the environment variable and assume that the delimiter is a colon, as if it were a kind of POSIX style path environment variable that gets additional paths added to it. That's pretty specific, and it's quite an assumption to make, and it's not what most users would expect. I think they'd expect when you create an environment variable file without a prefix, the behavior is the same as what would happen if you did environment variable equals value at a shell, right? Which is it sets the environment variable overriding the previous value. So this would change the default to override. This is a huge breaking change that would cause unexpected behavior changes in Buildpacks if you didn't know about it when you bumped your Buildpack API version. So definitely something we'd want to do before 1.0, but also definitely something that's very confusing right now.
I definitely endorse this. I have also lost a comment that I'm sure I made somewhere on here that was, you should probably, in the what it is, clarify process-specific environment variables as well in there. Your example only had all process variables.
Got it. Do you want to suggest a change? You can do sign-offs now with the suggested change interface, so it doesn't break DCO to just do them through the interface, if you didn't know that.
Yeah, but no, I don't.
Okay, fine. Then I can take that. Opt-in layer caching is next. Sorry, any questions on override invars by default? Anybody think it's a terrible idea that we shouldn't move, make a big breaking change? Anything like that? All right, next is opt-in layer caching. This is maybe the most fun. This suggests that there's kind of a lot of discussion on this one too. This suggests that we change the way layer caching works so that when a layer comes back or when layer metadata comes back, it's not automatically going to get added into the image without the Buildpacks knowledge. So if you had an old version of a Buildpack that had a layer called foo and later it was called foo bar, right? You could end up in a situation where when you upgraded your Buildpack to the latest version, if your Buildpack didn't look for any stray layers and delete them, you just permanently preserve foo continually into the image the whole time. And that's pretty weird. Even during build time, you could preserve a build layer like that, and it could just stick around and affect the environment without you knowing. Of subsequent Buildpacks too, even more unexpected without you knowing about it. Pretty big hole in the original spec for how layer caching should work. It's a very simple change. It just sets all the flags to off when layers are restored, makes the Buildpack set them again to their desired values. And also to prevent edge cases where other Buildpacks could still have references to those layers, it renames the layer directories to .ignore. At the end of the individual Buildpacks build, and so that it would break if another layer, if there's like a weird edge case where another layer, like a subsequent Buildpack could have been built to link to the previous one, and during that very next build, but not the build after, it would still be able to reference things in that layer at build time. And so renaming the directory after the Buildpacks build breaks those links and makes it discoverable earlier if you had that edge case. So that's a weird thing also. Any questions about this? This also breaks all caching of Buildpacks essentially. Every layer on the next build after this is implemented is no longer cached until Buildpacks start writing their layer tomls correctly.
Which is actually a relatively good failure mode, right? Stuff still works, just the performs worse. It's better than the environment variable failure mode, let's say that.
The caching opt-in logic is much simpler because it's just the same logic you did to set up caching before compared to cleanup logic that goes through and removes layers that the Buildpack doesn't know about. So I think it's straight UX improvement for Buildpack authors. All right, any questions? Going once, going twice. Moving on to the next one, decouple Buildpack plan and bill of materials. Emily really likes this one. This is a change where, so we have this kind of really interesting interface for the bill of materials right now where the build plan turns into the bill of materials, but you can edit it, but then also you can remove stuff and that kicks entries to the next thing. You have a file that's like read write and it started at a value and you made changes to it and rewrote it. It's kind of weird and it doesn't allow you to separate build time metadata from runtime metadata. And now that we have report toml, we have a place to put build time metadata about the image. And so this kind of refactors that so that the interface stays the same. You still get bill of materials in the as a command line argument, but you, instead of modifying that, you write it to launch toml and a new file called build toml that makes it into report, where build toml makes it into report toml in the end. Build toml has a new entry section where you can push entries to subsequent Buildpacks the same way you could use removing them in order to push them forward last time, but it's much more explicit that you're grabbing this and pushing it to the next one.
My one comment on this was I think the build plan is already complicated enough that most people don't use it who aren't Paketo. And the push entries, I think, are an additional level of complexity that most people don't use. So part of me wonders, like, if there's a clever way for us just to remove that, but I can also see that could be a different RFC, because this is an easy win as is without sort of tackling the edge cases around can we get away without having push entries.
I like push entries and think they're cool, but I'm happy to have that argument in a different RFC.
Yeah, I think in practice, though, whether they're complexity or something else, we don't use them like at all anywhere, as far as I'm aware. I'm sure there's a small place somewhere, but like as a general rule, we've never actually used them.
So they're not useful for like published build packs that do primary app compilation things. They're useful for extensions. When you have a meta build pack, you can use that push mechanism to create something that conditionally swaps a dependency by putting it before the meta build pack as like a thing that receives the provide and then eats it up and does something, or that says, no, I'm just going to pass it through and send it to the next thing. So it's like it's useful as an extension mechanism more than for like primary build packs that are offered, from different vendors. But again, I kind of think I want to take that discussion and make it a different RFC. I would think it's a bigger change to remove that completely as part of this than to preserve it in a way that doesn't add very much complexity to what's already being proposed. It goes in the same file as the build bomb. Cool. Any questions about this? Anybody have feedback on the UX? There was an original version of this that had 3 arguments going in instead, and I was going to use it to try to drive out moving everything to environment variables. But I like this is actually Emily's idea, the UX, and I like it a lot. But curious if others have thoughts. Wow, I think we're going to get to everything. So the very last one, and this is open just right before this, based on conversation I had with Ben 2 hours ago. This proposes a simple change to profile D to allow profile D to work without a shell, such that if a profile D script is in fact executable, it's not run with a shell, it's executed directly, and it outputs a list of key value pairs in the environment variable set format with the equal sign that gets set into the environment of the app process by the launcher directly. This would allow a distro list-like run image to have dynamic logic that runs before the main process starts. There's some open questions about how much we want to, if we use the executable bit, we're probably going to break a bunch of existing profile D scripts. If we use the executable bit and kind of look at, see if it's a text file, and if it has a shebang in the beginning, then we're in some weird territory, but we probably break slightly less people's things, but there are probably a ton of profile D scripts that just start with the shebang because people don't recognize that sourcing something is different than running it anyways. So I don't know how much it actually helps. And we might just want to think of it as a breaking change.
Core team. Chop chop.
Anybody have feedback on this or think it's a bad idea? It's just purely additive. It's not really a breaking change, but it enables a use case. It's important. Sorry, go ahead.
Is there any precedent for something like this in, I guess Profile D is like part of POSIX or something. Like, is there anything that's like, I don't see a prior art section in here. I don't know. It seems a little odd, and it just makes me wonder if we just need a separate construct for it.
Yeah, that'd be an argument I'd be open to. Like, I don't feel an intense requirement to overlap on top of Profile D. Like, it might be one of the ways we could disambiguate between the 2 use cases, but I do want the underlying technology to configure the environment that the process will run in without needing a shell in order to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh,
Basically, an executable that produces an M file, right? You just call it M file. Different directory from profile D.
exec.d. I thought about that a little bit if we wanted to not overload. And then if we do that, how do you feel about the standard out versus writing to a file? Because we had a lot of stuff writing specific metadata to standard out before and moved that to files. And so part of me wants to do that. But on the other hand, these are like, you might have a lot of these scripts, and is the lifecycle going to create some temp file for each of them and pass it as an argument? Like, it'd be doable, but like.
Yeah, those were all at build time. This is at run. Oh, wait, is this build time and runtime?
This be runtime, just runtime.
Yeah. The ones where we moved from standard out to files was all build time, right? And it was more about like, oh, what about it? You need it between these different phases and stuff like that. I don't think we have those same concerns here. So
the concern I have is
like every single one of those scripts that I'm trying to replace are writing to standard out anyway. So
some of them can sometimes log though, right?
Yeah,
we have to send logs to standard error. But that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of like standard out.
Yeah. I would prefer a file, even with the additional complexity. I think it disambiguates and gives us the logging, but I don't have a strong feeling in either direction.
My push, I was going to do a file originally, and the reason I felt weird about it is this is at launch. And so before your app launches, for every single profile D directory, you're going to have to create a file, fopen, write to the file, it's on disk. Like, you really could start to see a slowdown.
I've got to drop, but thanks for putting all these together, Stephen. I'll take a look at them as soon as I can.
Awesome, no problem. So I'll probably keep standard out until someone tells me they hate it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
that's the only thing.
The problem with us, yeah, I mean, that'd be even better. The big problem is with forcing us to log to standard error isn't that it's incorrect. It's almost undoubtedly correct, but the way our platforms, specifically, Stephen, log this, they put a big ERR in front of them, and every single one of our users thinks that means an error has happened. And so, like, we have a problem.
Can take the standard error from the script and put it to standard out.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking too.
Sure. That won't be confusing at all. But yeah, that's a reasonable approach to that.
Just have an FD3 that gets opened when it executes, and you just have to put stuff there and know that it's special. That'd be another way to do it.
Yeah.
All right. Lots of ideas. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. See you.